Hello, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Happy to have you with us across all of our video platforms here right now. Of course, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. We just finished off a great 1st and 15 there today on that. But those of you on Facebook or YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, we're just glad to have you as a part of the program. Really fun stuff today. We're going to get a chance to catch up a little bit later on with former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Jake's been joining us on Tuesdays a lot here over the course of the last few months. But today, joining us on a Friday for what is going to be a fun, special conversation. Jeff Sentell here, UGA recruiting information coming out with him. A couple of 5-stars going to factor prominently in that discussion. We'll get that with Jeff today there as well. Interesting, kind of funny statement from a former Georgia player, reunited with some other former Georgia players in the NFL. We'll share that. That's always a good time. Some really good golden shoes. But off the top, what a bold prediction. National writer has said something pretty strong about what he thinks could happen at Georgia here this year. We will debate it. I'm going to try not to be a wet blanket here, but there's also an element of, I think, truth that has to be sort of inserted into this conversation. So what do you say we do that off the top right now? We are so glad to have you with us. It's going to be a great show. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a certain mood I like to establish for a Friday show. You know, we're kind of going into the weekend, and I like for the Friday show to feel fun. I like for it to be positive. I like for everybody to kind of have good vibes going into the weekend. Now, I believe we're going to achieve that today. But I believe in order to get there, I've got to navigate a little bit of a landmine in terms of actually being able to produce that, because I'm going to fight the temptation to be a little bit of a wet blanket here for a moment. Now, I don't think I'm going to be that much of a wet blanket, but I don't believe that I can universally agree with a sentiment that's being expressed right now about a specific Georgia player for the upcoming season. Let me kind of lay this out and sort of explain this way. You know, yesterday we talked a lot about Carson Beck, who I think sort of appears to be on his way to being the Georgia starting quarterback here for this upcoming season after what I looked like a very successful spring for him. And I talked yesterday about the growth, the maturity that I think we've seen from Carson Beck. By the way, coming up in a few minutes here on today's show, we're going to hear from Jake Fromm. I'm going to ask him about that in particular, about, you know, someone who certainly understands the quarterback position. You know, what exactly did he see from Beck this spring, and does he agree with me that it certainly seems like this is a much more mature Carson than it was when he first arrived here in a very challenging 2020. This was a really good show yesterday with some really candid stuff from Carson Beck. I invite you to go back and revisit that if you haven't got a chance to see that as of yet. So I had a lot of very nice things to say about Carson Beck yesterday. I just believe that he had a phenomenal spring, and I believe that Carson Beck has really done a great job of growing into the role of seemingly now being ready to be the Georgia starting quarterback. And as I mentioned on one of our shows, I think it was last week while we were on the Dog Nation cruise, I don't think it should be taken for granted just how much Beck has grown, because that's not necessarily a natural progression. Everybody naturally gets older, but getting older doesn't naturally make you wiser unless you really do some work to make sure that you learn what you need to learn. And it certainly seems like Beck has used his time at Georgia very well. Obviously, he'd be the first to tell you he wishes he was playing. He wishes he'd been starting quarterback for the last, however many years. I'm sure that that's just a very honest feeling there, that if you're a college football player, you want to be on the field. Beck, to this point in his college career, has not been on the field as much as he would have liked for it to be. But by his own telling, and we played some of this for you yesterday in a sort of a candid interview that he did, while he was not playing, he was watching. And while he was watching, he was learning. And what he has learned, he is ready to put to good use. So I am very optimistic about what the outlook can be for Carson Beck as the Georgia starting quarterback this season. I think he could be set up to have a successful season, and I think he could be set up to be inserted into a Georgia offense that very much keeps the dream alive of, as we say around here, to go for 3 in 23 and win this program's third straight national championship. But this is where like the wet blanket version of me comes in, a more negative version of me comes in. I've also cautioned Georgia fans a lot over the course of this offseason. Be careful assuming that anything is going to be easy. And if you look at previous instances when teams have had a chance to go for that third straight national championship, what you see in many cases is sort of an obstacle or a challenge emerging that could not have been predicted at the beginning of the season, that college football is just not sort of set up to be easy. Big wins aren't easy to accomplish, and big games aren't easy for us to predict. That college football has a way of surprising us. So for those of us who are Georgia fans, hoping and maybe even expecting Georgia to win that national championship here this upcoming season and really put the program into kind of a top shelf of very rare history that almost nobody else can match and really no one else would be able to match. As Georgia goes on that journey to be able to do that, don't assume it's going to be easy, and be on the lookout, be on guard for something to kind of pop up and be a challenge that maybe right now does not necessarily appear to be that way. And all this kind of ties back to Carson Beck here for a moment, because we're kind of in that time of the year in which a lot of these national websites, the national writers for these websites, are updating what we sometimes call those way too early top 25s. And I guess at this point in time now, we've sort of shifted away from them being way too early. Now they're just preseason, because at this point in time, it's not way too early anymore. We're going to be playing football, coming up in just a few months here. So we've kind of arrived at the doorstep of the season. Final preparations taking place, a little bit of rest and relaxation during the summer months, and then boom, we're at it's fall. We're playing football here before you know it. So we've sort of transitioned away from top 25s being way too early, and now it's just more kind of a preseason top 25. And we talked in yesterday's show a little bit about the release recently from ESPN. Obviously, Georgia at number one there, according to the worldwide leaders, they like to think of themselves. And there's a new way too early or preseason top 25 out at CBS Sports. It's written by Dennis Dodd. And, once again, you should expect to see Georgia at the number one spot at all of these. And those of us who are Georgia fans, a lot of us probably expect Georgia to be at the end of this, number one in the country, when it's all said and done there as well. So it's not that interesting right now to see Georgia number one preseason top 25s. They're pretty much going to be they're pretty much going to be number one in all of those unofficial versions of that. When the two official polls come out in the summer, the coaches poll, the AP poll, Georgia's going to probably be and will be number one there in that spot there as well. So when you look at some of this preseason stuff, you have to look a little bit more deeply to sort of see what is interesting. And at the recent release from CBS Sports, the writer Dennis Dodd, there was one thing that Dodd wrote in his blurb about Georgia that I have to say I thought was pretty interesting. And I think it kind of counts as kind of a bold prediction for Georgia this season that actually might be a little bolder than some of y'all maybe realize, and that's where me as a little bit of a wet blanket, or me as a little bit of a more negative contrarian, probably comes in a little bit today. So let me read this to you. This is Dennis Dodd, CBSSports.com, on why he's got Georgia number one. There is one sentence I pulled out in here in particular that I thought was very interesting, and it relates back to Carson Beck, who we were just discussing a moment ago. So this is what Dodd writes, that Georgia might actually get an upgrade at quarterback where Carson Beck is projected to take over for Stetson Bennett. So what Dennis Dodd at CBS Sports is saying here is that not only does it look like Carson Beck is going to be Georgia's starting quarterback this season, Dodd suggests, and this is the bold prediction part of this, Dodd suggests that Beck this year could be even better than Stetson Bennett was over the course of the last 2 years as the Georgia starting quarterback. Now let me pause here for a minute. There are plenty of Georgia fans who absolutely believe this is true. We hear from them. They're in our comment section. They react and discuss things with us here on social media. We just have that conversation. I've been having conversations like this for quite some time. There are plenty of Georgia fans who say, yeah, you know what? I do think that Carson Beck can be better than Stetson Bennett. And obviously the truth is that he might be, that he might be a better quarterback than Stetson Bennett. That's at least a possibility. But here's where I think you have to be really careful here for a moment. I think you have to be really, really careful putting too much on Beck right now. And at a certain point, I think we all have to come to grips with, at no point in time has the career of Stetson Bennett largely been appreciated for what it was. When he was leading Georgia to its first national championship in a long time in 2021, I think Bennett was discounted. When he came back for the 2022 season, a lot of folks thought it'd be impossible for him to repeat what he had done the previous year, and he actually increased his performance and made himself even better. The Georgia offense seemingly got even better, and he won a second straight national championship. A lot of folks thought he might go undrafted. Ultimately, he was picked in the fourth round by a quarterback-friendly coach like Sean McVay. That the performance of Stetson Bennett at Georgia has just kind of always been better than it was given credit for being. And I think he leaves far bigger shoes to fill than he's been given credit for. That doesn't mean that Beck couldn't potentially surpass what Stetson Bennett did, nor does it mean that Beck might be deficient at the quarterback position for Georgia. But just be very careful, as I think Dennis Dodd may have done there at CBS Sports, just sort of flippantly tossing it out of, you know what, Carson Beck's going to be the quarterback, and he may even be better than Stetson Bennett. I mean, let's look at Georgia football history for a moment. I mean, how many quarterbacks, not just in recent years, but ever, how many quarterbacks have actually been drafted higher than what Stetson Bennett was here this year? Not nearly as many as you might think. The history of Georgia quarterbacks being drafted higher than Bennett was there in the 4th round. Boy, you got to go all the way back to Matthew Stafford to find a first-round pick, and you don't have a lot of examples of anything even close to that in program history. That Bennett being drafted in the 4th round is actually pretty high for Georgia quarterbacks when you go back and look at decades and decades worth of history. But not only that, a lot of people may not realize this. Bennett was 6th nationally in passing yards last season. 6th in the country. For a team that's sort of thought to be defense first, for a team that's sort of thought to be, over the course of history, RBU, running back university, ground and pound behind a big offensive line, Georgia actually threw the ball last year very, very well. Stetson Bennett actually threw the ball last year very, very well. That matching the statistical total that Bennett put up, not easy. Matching the performance in big games, MVPs, in the Orange Bowl, and the national championship, and then this year's national championship, and the SEC championship this year, and the Peach Bowl there as well, where you kind of went toe-to-toe with a quarterback like C.J. Stroud that was actually drafted in the 1st round from Ohio State. That actually matching that performance in big games, not an easy thing to do. So keep that in mind, please, and national writers keep that in mind there as well. But if Carson Beck actually performs as well as Stetson Bennett did this year, he'll actually be doing a lot, very, very well to be able to do that. And it shouldn't be said with sort of flippant disregard that, oh, yeah, he'll even be better than Stetson Bennett was because of the skill set that he brings to the table. Now, here's the good news. While I think at times some fans may understand this, and maybe at times some national media types may misunderstand this, the truth is the guy at the center of this entire discussion, Carson Beck, doesn't seem like he misunderstands this at all. We told you yesterday about a pretty candid interview that Beck had done with Footballville, a YouTube page that I was not familiar with before yesterday. We told you we'd put a link to this interview, and we obviously will do that for today's show there as well. But in light of what we were just talking about of, hey, Stetson Bennett, I believe, casts a big shadow over the Georgia quarterback position because of the success that he enjoyed, leaves big shoes to fill because of what he was able to do playing this position for this program in the midst of 2 straight national championship years. While some media types may not fully understand that, while some fans may occasionally misunderstand that, the truth is Carson Beck understands that full well. Near the end of the interview that Beck did with Footballville, he talked about that. The fact that, stepping into a role like Georgia quarterback right now, if he is indeed about to do that, he obviously hasn't been officially named the starter yet, but if he is indeed about to do that, Beck knows how good the guy before him actually was. So that's good news. This is Carson Beck on that topic.
There is a ton of pressure, whatever ends up happening, if that is me in the spot, there's tons of pressure because the guy that did it before, did win 2 national championships and had an unbelievable career. But that's out of my control what he did. The only thing I can control is going into practice on Monday, making sure I do that. And then Tuesday and then Wednesday, and day by day, and focus on each opponent individually and just get first downs and score touchdowns. That's all I can focus on. Because if I start to think about, oh, well, I have to be this. No, I just got to be myself, right. And at the end of the day, that's all you got to do as a football player is just be you. And, if things work out, it works out. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But, I have confidence in my ability. And I think if I just be myself, it'll work.
I mean, I love that response from Carson Beck. It's one of the reasons why I talked so much yesterday about the growth and maturity that he's shown and how much that's made me a fan of his, because I think he gets it. And if you tie that into what we heard from Beck yesterday, maybe as a young quarterback, and he wouldn't be the only one guilty of this, you sort of step onto a college field and you assume that it's maybe going to be easier than it actually is because you believe, as all quarterbacks do, that I'm the guy, I'm the alpha, I'm destined to succeed. But college football has a way of making you question yourself about that kind of stuff and maybe making you doubt yourself because it almost always ends up being harder in reality than it's kind of perceived to be in the minds of these potentially great players. And I think that Beck went through some of that. Well, now he fully appreciates the fact that Stetson Bennett went out there, succeeded the way that he did, and probably made the job of quarterback look easier than it was. And being as good as Stetson is no easy feat. And yet at the same time, Beck, while he maybe acknowledges that, also acknowledges but I'm confident that I'm ready. I'm confident that I've learned what I've needed to learn, and I'm ready to go out there and show it during practice each day during the week and on games for the 15 times we hope that Georgia gets to play this season. I don't think you could have a better response from Beck than that to what kind of exists right now. Not just big expectations for Georgia as a team, but big expectations for Beck personally to go out and have a great season, possibly built on the back of maybe a misunderstanding of exactly how good Stetson Bennett was. But Beck has a chance to be that good himself. Maybe he will have a chance to be better. Either way, the Georgia offense is going to be fascinating to see. Carson Beck has waited a long time for his moment, and there are a lot of people very curious to see what he brings to the table for the Dogs this season. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us. Live at 9:45, first and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch. Boy, a lot of video platforms to watch our show. You can listen to us on the radio if you're there in Athens on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcast, Apple, Spotify. Some of you listen directly on SoundCloud, worldfamousDawgNation.com. Lots of ways to connect with us, and we're just very, very glad that you picked one of them to join us and be a part of our show each and every day. Really thankful for all of that. Also thankful for our friends at Kroger on the program here today, too. And, boy, you drive around right now, you see all those signs kind of popping up of congratulations to our graduates, and every neighborhood seemingly has a slew of graduates they want to celebrate here right now. That lets you know the graduation season is on hand. Of course, our friends at Kroger got you covered on that, too. You're having those graduation parties. How about some decorated cakes? How about some party trays? All kinds of stuff to kind of decorate the house and celebrate the special grad there in your life. Kroger's got you on all of that. Even those gift cards or the greeting cards that kind of celebrate and say congratulations. You can get all that at your local Kroger. Go to Kroger.com/graduation for more on that. That's Kroger.com/graduation for more on that. I'll also tell you this while we're on the subject of Kroger, that you still got a little bit of time. I believe you have until Sunday at noon. I believe I'm right about that. Let me make sure. It's Sunday at noon, I believe. Yes, Sunday, May 7th at noon. That's when the entries are going to close for this. We've been doing our Kroger Perfect Moms giveaway because May, my wife and I talk about this a lot. May is low-key the busiest month of the year because you got the end of school, you got sports season kind of wrapping up a little bit. I've got a graduation. My son's going to be graduating 5th grade here this year, so that's always a big emotional thing. He does not want us to make a big deal about that, but I told him too bad. It's just one of those things where we just have a lot going on. All of you do there as well. So Mother's Day is a big part of this too. So don't miss out on this. And for those of you who want to see your mom potentially recognized next week as one of our Kroger Perfect Moms, of course, we're celebrating Perfect Moms in honor of the Dogs. Perfect season. In honor of all of that, you got a little bit of time as you hear this show throughout the weekend to kind of get your nomination in. We're going to close it up on Sunday, start announcing our winners next week. It's going to be one per day. We're going to draw these winners at random and celebrate some great stories of some truly perfect moms who are kind of right there for what we need, right when we need it. That's what we mean when we say perfection from these great moms in our audience. So whether it's your mom or just a mom you have in your life, your wife, your sister, your daughter, your whatever else, whatever story you want to tell, send that to us. Top of the page there at DawgNation.com. There's a great link that you can click into to share your story, submit your entry, your nomination, and then next week we're going to start drawing some names and announcing some winners, one per day on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger there next week. And for the moms that are honored and that are selected, a great collection of gift cards coming your way, valued at $350, from about $150 to Kroger, a $100 gift card to Macy's, a $100 gift card to Bath & Body Works. What a great collection of gift cards to our Kroger Perfect Mom winners. So please check out DawgNation.com. Nominate a mom in your life there on that. You got until noon on Sunday to do it, and then we'll draw names out. We'll start announcing our winners next week. It's one of my favorite things we do each and every year. The response to this is always terrific, and this year has certainly been no different. So good stuff coming out on that next week. All right, let me give you one more housekeeping note, and then we're going to dive into what's next. So today, our show is obviously live. I could hold up the copy of the paper, and you'd be able to see this. Today, we are live on the show. But there are two elements today that are pre-recorded, and they're pre-recorded for completely different reasons. Our great friend Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback, he is in the midst of like a bunch of OTA stuff with the Washington Commanders, his NFL team. So Jake's been kind enough to actually still join us, despite the fact that he's, tried to have a football career too. So Jake's kind enough to join us. Has been joining us on Tuesdays for a while, but we had to kind of accommodate him at a different time this week. So we pre-recorded this yesterday to air today. So before we're done, we actually get a chance to hear from the great former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. And as I told you before, I talked a lot yesterday and also just a moment ago about kind of the growth and maturity of Carson Beck. Jake Fromm's got some interesting stuff to say about that. We'll let you hear it before we are done on today's show. Also, for a completely different reason, our normal Friday guest, Jeff Sentell, had to step away from work for a few minutes today, so he was kind enough to join us yesterday. Plenty of really good recruiting stuff with him. We're going to get into five-star linebacker Sammy Brown, five-star quarterback, of course, Dylan Raiola. I don't know when there'll be an interview with Jeff that I don't ask Jeff at least something about Raiola. That obviously continues here for today's conversation, too. So really good recruiting stuff coming up with Jeff. Great stuff coming up with the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. It is a busy show to conclude a week here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Now, with all that said, let's go around the doghouse, presented today and served up today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And when I talk to Jake later on, there's kind of a funny thing that kind of plays out here from the standpoint that I asked Jake about, Jake's with the Washington Commanders, right? And division rival, the Philadelphia Eagles. I asked Jake, as a former Dog, but also a division rival of the Eagles, what do you think about all the buzz that Philadelphia has kind of earned here when it comes to the former Dog players who are there in Philadelphia now? And Jake had some sort of funny stuff to say about that because he has to sort of view those guys a little bit of a rival right now. So that's good stuff coming up with Jake here in a little bit. But it's not just been the drafted players for Philadelphia. And by the way, congratulations to Jalen Carter, who did become the first-round pick to get his contract announced. That happened yesterday. He's obviously got that generational wealth. That's what we say all the time around here. Listen, you can get the NIL money if you want to, but ultimately, as John Calipari said, that's just sort of tripping over on nickels as you kind of walk your way towards the big money that you can get at the NFL level. And obviously, Jalen Carter kind of showing you that. Life-changing, $20+ million, whatever it is. Big-time dollars coming the way of Jalen Carter, so we send him some heartfelt congratulations. But it's not just those draft picks who are kind of populating that Philadelphia roster right now. It's also a trade for former Georgia running back now in Philadelphia, too, DeAndre Swift. And, Swift was recently talking about the move from Detroit to Philadelphia. And I want to play this audio clip here because it's kind of an example of just sort of the cold, hard nature of the NFL. In college football, one of the reasons why I love this sport is there's still some room, I think, for a little bit of like sentimentality. You do it for Big State U, and, it sort of feels like we can kind of create a little bit of a family vibe here every now and then. Well, in the NFL, that's not necessarily the case. And DeAndre Swift sort of acknowledged that of, hey, listen, I got traded. They didn't really tell me anything. I just woke up one day and found out I was a Philadelphia Eagle. This is the reality in the NFL. Here's DeAndre Swift talking about that.
It was a surprise. There's no really explanation. Everything kind of went through my agent. Like I said, there's a lot of different emotions going up and down. I'm excited to be here. But first and foremost, thank Detroit for everything. To the city of Detroit, will forever have a place in my heart. Will love them for the opportunity that they gave me to just go out there and live out my dreams. But like I said, I'm excited for this new chapter.
It is what it is, sort of an overused phrase, but in this particular case, that sort of sounds like the actual description. Hey, it just is what it is. Detroit wanted to trade him. They did. Didn't tell him why. Just shipped him off to Philadelphia. But it seems like DeAndre's pretty happy to be reunited with a bunch of former Dogs there on that Philadelphia Eagles roster. I want to read this quote to you. I don't have the audio to play for you in this. I'm just going to read the quote. I like this from Swift about the presence of so many UGA players there with the Eagles. DeAndre saying that's just a testament to the job that Kirby and his staff does over there, preparing players for life after football and the NFL next level. Now, listen, this is good stuff. He says, the Eagles definitely know where to get their players from. And that's really cool. Obviously, DeAndre Swift back in his hometown there in Philadelphia, but repping UGA as he does so, the way that so many former Eagles players will be. And there are a lot of Dogs who are very, very excited about seeing how it goes for a lot of former UGA players up there right now in the city of brotherly love. That has been a hot topic since the NFL draft. And obviously, don't forget DeAndre Swift now, a big part of that there as well. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And you can pour yourself up some Finish Long Drink here this weekend there too. Because as I've said before, I think the Finish Long Drink goes great with anything. But there's something about being outside this time of year. It's about time to be out in swimming pools again, which is always a great thing, or back patios, or certainly golf courses, things like that. Well, when you're doing that, the finished long drink always goes great with that, whether it's the long drink cranberry, the long drink strong, which is 8.5% alcohol by volume, so I know some of y'all like that. Long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. How about the traditional? It's a blue can. It's got the grapefruit flavor. It's got the gin kick. That's probably my favorite version of the finished long drink. I just sort of like the classic flavor that it's kind of famous for, and you get that with the traditional in the blue can. You can go to the longdrink.com. You can sort of figure out which long drink variety is the best for you. You can also get one of those 8-can variety packs, which is actually 2 different cans and of each of the 4 different varieties of the finished long drink. So that's a really cool thing there as well. You can also find out the story. It comes from Finland, Helsinki, back in the 1950s when the Summer Games were there for the first time. And it's been in America now for a couple of years. It's also now in Georgia, pretty much anywhere you want to go. So go to thelongdrink.com, and you can find out where to pick some up today. All right, let me give you an update here one more time about what's going to be happening on the rest of the show. So before we are done, it's Jake Fromm, the great former Georgia quarterback, talking about a wide range of topics, including some of the Carson Beck stuff off the top of the program here today. We'll get into the Alabama baseball scandal and the embarrassing situation that results in the baseball coach being fired because it's very odd gambling behavior. We'll get to that here before we're done on the program today. But for now, Dylan Raiola, Sammy Brown, upcoming dates of note for UGA recruiting fans. A lot of recruiting information. Let's dive into it all with Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Always love on a Friday, get a chance to talk some UGA recruiting with Jeff Sentell. And Jeff, I guess we'll begin this conversation the same place we have for the last several weeks. The latest information on 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. That has really been a name of note for Georgia fans for quite some time. And I guess the new information to offer this week is that Mike Bobo, the Georgia offensive coordinator, was spotted out there in Arizona with the Pinnacle program, getting thanked for stopping by to visit, come out to check practice. Not the only spot in Arizona that Bobo visited while he was out there, but how does this kind of factor into everything else that has been going on with Georgia and Raiola as of late? A little bit of a long road trip, air flight for Bobo to go out and visit him there in Arizona. What can you add to what we learned on social media this week?
Well, hey, man, good morning, everybody. Brandon, I think one thing we know about Mike Bobo is he don't mind getting on a plane cross-country to go look for a quarterback. He did that many times in his career when he was a Bulldog, especially. I thought it was pretty interesting, Brandon. 2 things. One, I saw that the impression of the Georgia visit got like 15,000 immediate views on Twitter. And compared to the other traction that the Pinnacle high school football coaching visits were getting, roughly 28 times the size of all the other ones. You also didn't see a Nebraska coming up or Oregon coming up or USC coming up in subsequent days after that initial thanks for visiting tweet. So, that's a lot of tea leaves here with Mr. Raiola and the courtship there with the Bulldogs. Brandon, I thought probably the most interesting tweet of the week regarding Raiola was a triple whammy. If you saw the one from AP Hayward, Jalen Hayward, a guy that I think Georgia's going to have to maybe dig their heels in and hunker down to hold on in the class. Well, he sent out a tweet basically saying, let them know where home is to the fan base on social media. And he not only included a picture of himself but with Dylan Raiola, but also KJ Bolden. And again, that's another thing. KJ Bolden's the number 1 safety in the country. Georgia, depending on the service you subscribe to, could eventually, if Bolden does choose Georgia, end up with the number 1, number 2, and number 3 safeties in the country. And the KJ Bolden recruitment, it sounds like AP Hayward is rubber stamping it, and he's here for it. So that's good sweet stuff going on this week as visits start rolling.
Yeah, no doubt about that, and that's interesting to follow. And obviously, before we're done today, I want to talk to you more about what this kind of leads up to over the course of the next few weeks with a series of key dates coming up for Georgia. We'll get to that here coming up in a moment. But something else that you mentioned there, I keep coming back to, as you said. So Bobo is in Arizona this week. He's visiting Raiola, and he's also stopped by in Saguaro and places like that too. But to me, what continues to be the most interesting thing about Raiola's recruitment is kind of the absence, as you said, of the USCs or the Oregons or the schools like that in this recruitment. I mean, listen, I'm the last one that wants to say never say never, because we've seen weird things happen in recruiting as of late. But that continues to me to be the most important piece of evidence here is how active Georgia remains in this recruitment at a time in which other schools just seem to have reevaluated their priorities, I guess is the best way to say that.
You and I have been doing this for a minute now. That's a good topic right there. I wonder, has there ever been a recruitment where the parallel I'm going to make, and I'm not trying to act like I'm an expert in theology here, but it kind of feels like, I don't know if I've ever quite encountered DawgNation in this fan base, kind of waiting for the white puffs of smoke to come out with Raiola. There's a lot of attention. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of anticipation. And it seems like bated breath is a lot of DawgNation, just kind of waiting and hoping to see the eventual news drop when it does. Because everybody likes a five-star quarterback, but this one right here with the arm talent, the generational talent in some aspects, and all the ties to Georgia, I think really geek up the anticipation there. I don't know. What do you think, Brendan? Have you ever seen the fan base kind of with bated breath for an announcement that seems like it's gonna work its way out on its own due time?
It feels a little bit different than things we've had before because, and maybe I'm reading this wrong, Jeff, but it sort of seems like we're kind of post recruiting drama in some respects, where it's like we've seen some kind of surprising flips, in some cases not even involving Georgia. Like last year, Dante Moore last minute decided to go to UCLA. So we see some recruiting drama in terms of out of nowhere a guy just sort of changes his mind where he might go. But the idea of, hey, where are my Dog fans at? Or, hey, where are my, Auburn, like the player that wants to kind of cultivate as much attention for his recruitment as possible, that just doesn't seem to be quite the same currency that it used to be, where now you have actual hard cash. That's the real currency, and maybe NIL and things like that. Or just, I guess, more grown-up priorities as it relates to recruiting right now. It sort of seems like there's less of the kind of old-school recruiting theatrics the way we had in the past, and now there's a lot more measured business decisions, and it may lead at times with some recruits making an about face at the final moment before they make their choice, but it doesn't seem as made for TV as it used to be. Would you agree with that, kind of covering the industry on the inside, whereas someone like me just more observes the industry? Would you agree with that on the inside?
Yeah, I think it's just a different time, Brandon, and we're like 2 or 3 years, a really quick 2 or 3 year metamorphosis, I might say, about how the recruiting process goes now. I think the other thing that makes this one different, there's two. Number one, there's the rush for everybody that, hey, I know all this information. Come follow me. I'm going to give you a scoop, and here you go, and look at me get some clout because I'm going to tell you this is going to happen soon, and I'm going to tell you it's coming, so then everybody will go back and say, hey, man, that Brandon Adams dude said it was about to happen, man. He's a dude that's on his P's and Q's right now. That's sort of a feeling I have right here that kind of adds to it. But the other thing, Brandon, I'm just going to be real. The thing that's different now, is, especially in this Georgia football fan base, is Dylan Raiola, should he choose Georgia and sign with Georgia, is no longer the guy taking Georgia out of the wilderness and into the promised land and breaking the drought.
That's true.
I mean, really, I think that's a big point where the bated breath type stuff really nobody has an edge to it anymore because nobody's sitting there going, can he be the guy? I mean, now it's probably going to be for the foreseeable future. Can he be another Stetson? Or really, I guess, part of the matter is, can this be the quarterback that takes Georgia's offense to the promised land and brings a lot of five-star weapons on the offensive side of the ball as well? I think that's maybe the anticipation factor and everybody getting geeked up about. It's no longer winning the title. It's having Georgia have potentially the heavyweight slobber knocker offense, fireworks, and all of college football.
Well, speaking of five-star recruits, let's go to the other side of the ball and stay in state for a moment. There's new information out there about the linebacker Sammy Brown out of Jefferson. I know you got that for us at DawgNation.com. I've always liked Sammy. I think he's a good player. I've seen him obviously in person. I probably have a little bit of a bias in favor of some of these guys. They're somewhat close to home, and Jefferson's just down the road from Athens. So I like the idea that it seems like Georgia is a big factor in his recruitment. A year after, Georgia just brought in a trio of inside linebackers, about as good as anybody's ever brought in. The fact that has not seemed to slow down the efforts here on Sammy Brown, I take that as really good news. What is the latest that you can tell us about where things stand with Georgia and Brown right now? Obviously, Georgia not the only school that's going to deep down the road with Sammy.
Yeah, I think, Brandon, it's interesting. Sammy, in the context of this, Brandon, he's just a wonderful kid. Like, I think any mother in the world, if you said the kid's going to have to take that mullet haircut, but he's going to give you everything else. He's going to give you never made a B. He's going to give you three-sport athlete. He's going to give you model son. He's going to give you just really loves hunting and fishing more than anything else. Oh, yeah, he's the number one linebacker in the country. Oh, yeah, he can squat about 545 pounds 4 times. He can power clean 400. He can run a 10.7 in the 100 meters. Just astounding type numbers. Oh, yeah, I can't forget this, Brandon. He's a 2-time defending state wrestling champion as well. And he doesn't like the photo shoots. I mean, really, it's funny. He told me recently that he goes on them now, and he's like, what do I do with my hands? Like, I'm out of poses. I don't really like. He's kind of done with the recruiting process now, and he's not going to take any unofficial visits now until he takes his 5 officials in a row. The old school folks out there would love the part that Sammy's like, I know I can get 10. I know I can get as many as I want. I don't need that many. 5 is going to be fine. He's going to see Tennessee. He's going to see Georgia. He's going to see Clemson. He's going to see Oklahoma. He's going to see Ohio State. That's basically going to be it. Oklahoma has a specific date. Clemson had a specific date. He's going to see Georgia the second weekend in June. And he said something to me twice now, Brandon. And I do these interviews all the time, probably 20 a week. And he said something a while back where he said, the competition at Georgia is actually a plus and not a minus. Because he knows he's not at the level of those guys yet, and he knows that will allow him to summon up the football he needs to try and reach their level. That's what he loves. But the other thing he loves about Georgia, and he shared that with me this week, Brandon, is think about this. A guy that makes all A's, a guy that is in the top 1% of track guys, the top 1% of wrestling guys, a guy that's in the top 1% of guys in the weight room in high school football. He looks to find a competitive culture. He wants to be around achievers, and he sees excellence at Georgia. He loves the way they practice. He says he's never seen a unit practice the way Georgia does. He says it's just different, not only the intensity, where the last couple times he said, Brandon, he's seen offensive linemen and defensive linemen get in a fight in practice because it's so, it's not, I'm not talking steel cages and bare knuckle brawls or anything like that, or a loser leaves town match, Brandon, but he likes seeing that on the football field. And then he loves the relationship with Glenn Schumann. He told me, he said Glenn Schumann feels like he's already coaching him more than he is recruiting him. And for a really sensible, down-home son of a coach, high schooler, it matters. And that's what he wants to hear rather than pitches, because give Glenn Schumann this for definitely not being tone-deaf with this recruitment. But he's realized that Sammy's about done with all the promises and the pitches and the photo shoots and all the glad-handing. And he just wants to figure out the best place where he can play his best football.
I think that's really, really cool to hear. That's great stuff. Let me finish with this, Jeff. I know that we're kind of calm before the storm here a little bit at the beginning of the month of May. As we head towards the end of this month and start certainly thinking about next month, it gets really busy for Georgia. I guess you got, scavenger hunt coming up here in the next probably 3 weeks, and then it's massive official visits, obviously the first week in June we've talked a ton about. But just kind of remind us here about key dates to know and just kind of what our recruiting calendar should look like in our minds, as a lot of the big pieces of this 2024 class, one way or another, are maybe about to come together.
Yeah, it's going to get busy in about maybe a couple weeks. First of all, scavenger hunt, Brandon, it's kind of evolved into a Georgia tradition, but it's also evolved into something where you plant the seeds for not the immediate seniors, but in this class, it would be the 2025s. I know Georgia's going to try to get David Sanders, probably will, the 5-star all-everything tackle out of Charlotte for scavenger hunt. He told me that that's something that's really much on his mind. They're also going to welcome an official visit in terms of Casey Poe, a young man out of Texas, Brandon, who's got a lot of that good old Southern boy qualities to him. Kind of feels like the ideal Stacy Searles type offensive lineman. He's already been out to his high school this week to see him. Coaches, Brandon, are also on the road right now, as we talked about earlier with Raiola. But that's happening. And then, hey, circle your calendars. I think Brandon, I think Kirby's going to try and top this every year, but he wants that first weekend of June to be the greatest official visit weekend in the history of Georgia football recruiting.
Yeah.
He had a lot teed up on the bar last year with Justice Haynes, Caleb Down, Arch Manning, Raylan Wilson, C.J. Allen, on and on, Gabe Harris, Damon Wilson. A lot of guys that went one way, a lot of guys went the Dogs' way as well. But he's going to beat that this year with the likes of, Justin Green, for example, Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Wingo, Dylan Raiola. Really, Georgia is trying to funnel all of their top targets into that first weekend in June if possible. Marquez Easley, you got offensive linemen there. You got everybody except maybe a guy like K.J. Bolden. And, Peyton Woodard's going to be there. And you're going to have K.J. Bolden not going to be able to make it. But I just wonder if he's anywhere else and not visiting anywhere else. He might just drive up to Athens for an unofficial visit as well with a lot going on. Because that certainly, if you're an unofficial visitor that weekend in Athens, you're certainly going to come out of that weekend feeling like that might have been your best official visit when you didn't even really take one.
Man, it just sets up for a really fun summer. Obviously, Georgia in a recruiting sphere that we've gotten very used to, but at the same time, this has a chance to be as good as anything we've seen. And on the heels of 2 straight national championships, I guess you wouldn't expect anything less than that. Great coverage of that, Jeff. Thanks for a fun conversation. We'll look forward to reading about much more of this from you at DawgNation.com there as well. We'll watch you this upcoming Wednesday on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, and see you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, again next Friday as well. Appreciate your time, Jeff.
Guys, hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. And I'll tell you, Brandon, it never gets old now when you hear about a kid getting a Georgia offer.
That's right.
And they hadn't been recruited yet, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, Georgia just offered. They're immediately at the top of my list. It's just different recruiting for the University of Georgia these days. Those coaches in Athens got a great product to sell, and they know how to sell it. So we'll be here to cover it all.
Great time to be a Dog fan, Jeff. We'll talk to you next time.
Take it easy, man.
And now let's do our SEC through.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really fun to get a chance to talk to some Georgia recruiting with Jeff Sentell. Pre-recorded, that's why, if you're watching a video, that's why I was wearing a red shirt in the interview and a black shirt right now. That's pre-recorded with Jeff. Jeff couldn't be with us today, but nonetheless, delivering some strong stuff. We recorded that yesterday afternoon, so really, really good stuff from Jeff Sentell. And speaking of really good stuff, man, around my house, we're getting excited because we have a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation with my family. When we took the DawgNation cruise last week, kids were in school, wife was staying home with them, so did not get to take my family on board Independence of the Seas last week for our DawgNation cruise, but we're going to be on board Independence of the Sea for one of those weekend cruises coming up here really soon in the month of June. So, boy, I'm excited about that. It's kind of fun to hear the family start to get excited and talk about stuff like that. There's just a lot of energy around our household about all of that. We just kind of get excited about summer in general, but obviously this summer for us, that also includes a trip on Independence of the Seas for a great cruise for ourselves. So listen, it's a cue to you to start getting those vacations planned yourself here this summer. Whether you want to be like us and take one of those weekend 3-night cruises, or you want to do like a DawgNation cruise and do the 4-night deal. We left on a Monday, came back on a Friday, really, really convenient, got back home in time for the weekend and had just a wonderful, wonderful time. Or maybe you're ready for the big experience, the kind of experience you get on board a 7-night cruise, perhaps on one of those Oasis-class ships, the largest cruise ships at sea, that offer the multitude of neighborhoods like the Central Park area, the Boardwalk area, or obviously the Royal Promenade. The different kinds of entertainment you get on board one of these, like the Aqua Theater with the wonderful, high diving shows off the back of the ship, and then you got the ice skating rink and the wonderful theater where you have Broadway style shows. It's amazing. At no additional charge, the level of just great entertainment that Royal Caribbean provides you on one of these cruise ships. It's truly a great family vacation. They do so many things for the entire family, and that's one of the reasons why I love having my entire family on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Also, Royal Caribbean believes that a great travel agent can help make your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation even better. That's why they recommend Jessica Slater. She's done a great job for both my own personal travel and obviously our DawgNation cruise there as well. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can check out Jessica Slater today, and she can tell you everything you need to know about a wonderful Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. All right, let's go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I've got a few stories I want to hit, but I want to try to hit them quickly because I know a lot of you want to hear from Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback. We'll do that here in just a couple of minutes. Let me start with what obviously is maybe the biggest story in sports today because of how odd it is, the fact that Alabama has quickly moved to fire its baseball coach, Brad Bohannon. Obviously, we don't talk much about Alabama baseball on this show, but this is obviously kind of an embarrassing situation where Bohannon, it is believed, was a part of some betting activity against his team going back last weekend in games against LSU. What happened is a lot of sports books halted betting on Alabama baseball. And you kind of trace this back. It's not believed that any Alabama players were involved in anything, but it seems like there's some pretty strong evidence out there to suggest that a bettor had Bohannon on the phone while in line to place a bet on LSU against Alabama. Alabama had scratched its top starting pitcher, had some other starters, I believe, out that day there as well. Kind of inside information that Bohannon gave to somebody else, and that person made a bet on all of this. Now, what is so weird about this is, to be just completely frank, how dumb it is. Because here's the thing. Apparently Bohannon did not realize, if I had to guess, if this is all playing out the way it's being reported, apparently Bohannon didn't quite realize how easy this was going to be to track down. Because there are just not a lot of bets taken on college baseball. In fact, FanDuel, I think it's reported, they didn't take a single bet on the LSU-Alabama game in question at all. That just not very many bets on this. It's typically kind of a low-limit deal. And the same thing's been true in, like, over the years when it comes to college basketball. You've heard about, like, point-shaving scandals and things like that. You know, a lot of the action in those games out in, like, say, Las Vegas years ago when it would have happened, I mean, there's been a lot of reporting about this. In a lot of instances, when a point-shaving type game took place, Vegas sort of knew something was up, because if you typically think about X number of dollars being bet on a college basketball game, a typical regular season game during the week just doesn't draw a lot of betting action. Well, on this sort of random game, maybe there was 20x, amount of dollars bet on it, and you sort of knew, well, something's not quite right here, because a lot of people seem to think they know something. It was the kind of the same type of thing here when it comes to, the Alabama LSU baseball game, where just way too much action on a game that typically shouldn't have anything bet on it whatsoever. But at the same time, because college baseball is a relatively lightly bet sport, the limits on what you can get down in a game is very, very low. And so ultimately, Bohannon, who's paid hundreds of thousands of dollars as the Alabama baseball coach, has now, risked his career and certainly ruined his reputation over what probably turns out to be just a few $1,000s in financial gain. There's never a right reason to do the wrong thing, of course. I'm not suggesting that. But, boy, if you're going to put your whole life on the line, you'd like to think somebody had more to gain than what Bohannon, had the chance to cash in on this. This is truly just one of the dumbest things that anyone's ever done. And obviously it kind of adds to what has been a pretty ugly picture for Alabama athletics over the course of the last year or so. That right now, Nick Saban, the football team, they're still in contention for championships, things like that, even after 2 regular season losses a year ago. But if not for the Alabama football team, if not for the veneer of respectability they provide, think about how much more negative attention Nate Oates would be getting as the basketball coach, what's happening here with the baseball team. There was an issue involving an associate athletic director. Obviously, you're talking about some player arrests, things like that. You could go through a laundry list of things that have taken place there at Alabama that would be getting even more negative attention if not for kind of what you're getting from the football team here right now. Now, I'm also going to get on a tiny soapbox for like 5 seconds, then I'll move on to something else. Here's what kind of frustrates me a little bit. I mean, clearly in this case, Bohannon has done wrong. The guy that he was using as his proxy to make these bets, it appears that he's done wrong too, if the reporting that we've read so far is accurate. And obviously, everybody that kind of covers this from a media standpoint sort of jumps in on this. I think even in the light of what appears to be just obvious wrongdoing, I still think we pay way too much attention to what individuals try to do to sports books, and we don't pay nearly enough attention to what sports books try to do to individuals. That the sports betting media, for the most part, writes from kind of the book point of view. And I think that we need more sports betting media that kind of writes from the better point of view. Right now, really nobody does that. This obviously looks like, kind of a scandal and, kind of, wrongdoing on the part of the bettor against the book. But listen, when you look at some of the lines that are out there, and some of y'all know this if you follow betting and pay attention to that, when you look at some of the huge holds that exist on some of these, that the kind of value the typical sports book offers to a bettor, the fact that if you have any, if it seems any chance whatsoever that you might be a sharp player, that you might win some games, there's a lot of sports books that just simply won't take your action. You can cite lots of evidence right now that the books oftentimes aren't exactly doing right by the players. But that doesn't get written about nearly as much because, for the most part, most big media entities are in bed with some kind of sports book. Therefore, they sort of write their betting coverage from a sports book point of view. If you don't care about gambling, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you do bet, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And moving forward, I still think we need more of that, even in light of what appears to be, you know, attempt at fraud against the sports book. There are plenty of things that sports books attempt to do to bettors that also kind of veer in that direction there as well. But we don't seem to get quite as much coverage of that. Just worth pointing that out. Now, on a completely different subject here for a moment, we've kind of entered into kind of rubber chicken circuit time of year when a lot of these coaches sort of go on their tours. You know, Tennessee calls its version of this the Big Orange Caravan. Kirby Smart does not really do much of this anymore. If you want to know any example of, you know, kind of what makes Kirby, obviously the king coach in college football right now, looking down on everybody else. I think Kirby does like 3 or 4 of these for the entire year. They're usually pretty spaced out. I know he was in Macon not too long ago, but Kirby does not do a ton of like, you know, caravan, you know, tour type stuff, whereas most coaches are traveling around their state, kind of barnstorming, trying to sort of, you know, get some folks excited about the upcoming season. Josh Heupel doing that around Tennessee, and the Tennessean had an interesting quote from Heupel at one of these recent appearances where he was asked about the defense, and what he said is that at Tennessee we don't just want to play good defense. We want to play, I think the phrase that he used was elite defense. We want to be an elite defense at Tennessee. And I was looking at some of the numbers. So they were 6th in the SEC last year in points allowed per game, somewhere in the low 20s. So they're, you know, 6th in the SEC. They're on that. And I think it's a fair question to ask is, can it get better? And this is upcoming on year 3 for Tennessee. And the belief you've probably heard me express in the past is that there is no free lunch. If you choose to play your offense and kind of perform your offense at the speed with which Tennessee plays, which obviously works well for its offense, they score a lot of points, and they're tough to stop. They have a clear offensive system that gives them, you know, a little bit of a personality. When you close your eyes and picture Tennessee football right now, led by Josh Heupel, you sort of have a pretty strong picture in your mind of what that looks like. But when you play that fast, even if it results in a lot of points for your offense, it does put a lot of pressure on your defense. And about 6th best in the SEC, I wonder if the ceiling for Tennessee defensively is much higher than. I'm actually not quite so sure that it is, because you're asking those defensive players to do an awful lot there. Plus, when you talk about a Tennessee team that, you know, if you want to look back at the previous years prior to Heupel getting there, just was not necessarily doing gangbusters recruiting, and by the way, had a lot of transfer attrition once Jeremy Pruitt left a couple of years ago. I think seeing how much better Tennessee can be defensively this year compared to what they've been in the past, I think it's worth pointing out. Or I should say, I think it's worth observing to see how it plays out, maybe better said. Look at some of the preseason top 25s that are out there right now. You sort of see Tennessee everywhere from, I think it's about as high as 11th to somewhere around like 15th, 16th, something like that. That seems about right to me. They could be better than that. It's going to take better defensive play to get them there, but they could be worse than that. And if Tennessee loses games prior to playing Georgia in November, like on the road at Alabama or against Texas A&M, some of these other games that Tennessee has to play, some defensive breakdowns are probably the reason why. It's easy for Josh Heupel to go on the, you know, barnstorming tour with a lot of his fans across the state and say, hey, we're going to be an elite defense. But what are you actually doing to make your defense elite? That's one of those things we'll be watching for to see from Tennessee this season. 2 other quick stories here that have been out there. We just haven't had much time to talk about as of yet. T.J. Finley, the former LSU, now former Auburn quarterback, is entering the transfer portal again. Finley's a grad transfer, so he's not bound by that portal window for typical transfers that closed on April 30th. And it also stands to reason now that Finley's next stop is certainly going to be outside the SEC, if not the Power 5, you know, completely. Finley had some nice moments at LSU going back years ago. Never quite matched that for the most part there at Auburn, and probably now looking to step down at least a level for his next college home. But it does sort of remind you that his departure leaves a door open for another quarterback there at Auburn. And there are a few, you know, situations in the SEC where quarterback is just wide open right now. The Florida situation, Billy Napier has openly said we'd love to bring in another quarterback of some kind. We'll see if they're able to. Obviously, Alabama took Tyler Buckner the other day, a guy who might have been third-string quarterback at Notre Dame if he stayed, and now he comes to compete for the Alabama starter. So obviously the Alabama quarterback situation is a little bit of a mess right now. And then you add to that Auburn. Now, Hugh Freeze historically almost always has a good quarterback, but you're kind of left to wonder right now on the Plains what kind of raw materials he gets a chance to work with. Robbie Ashford, I think, has shown you some stuff from time to time. He's a little bit of a fan favorite because he's, you know, from the Hoover area in the state of Alabama. But you also had the other day Casey Thompson, the former Nebraska quarterback, visiting Auburn. We'll see if Auburn is able to win with a transfer quarterback like that and get him on the roster. And we'll see if Thompson were to come to Auburn, what kind of difference he can make. That right now, there are a lot of SEC teams who hope a quarterback currently outside their program can step in and be better than what their current quarterbacks are. And there may be no more significant situation where that's taking place than at Auburn, especially from a Georgia fan standpoint, because, of course, the Dogs do go on the road to Jordan-Hare Stadium there on September 30th. So figuring out what Auburn's going to do at quarterback doesn't just matter for the Tigers. It probably matters for Dog fans a little bit there as well as they look at one of their key opponents. Then finally there's this. This is another one of those stories that I meant to mention the other day. We ran out of time, and I guess now it's a few days old, but I did want to make sure that we gave it to you before the week is out. So we saw a little bit of a coaching shakeup recently in the SEC where Jimmy Lindsey was hired at LSU as a new defensive line coach, got paid big bucks to leave South Carolina, his old spot, to come there to LSU. It seems like, though, South Carolina is not crying too many tears over this. Lindsey leaves, goes to LSU, gets a big paycheck to do so, but South Carolina brings in Travion Robertson, who had been at Tulane. At one point in time, he was on the Georgia staff many, many years ago, but had been at Tulane, been at Georgia State. He's a South Carolina grad, and it seems like, Gamecock's going to bring one of their own back to work with the defensive line here. So it seems like they're pretty excited about adding Robertson. And, Lindsey moves on, gets big dollars there at LSU. We'll see what kind of impact he makes there. But it looks like South Carolina right now is pretty happy to be adding Robertson. And as I've told you before, keep your eye on South Carolina. A lot of recruiting momentum for the Gamecocks here right now, bringing back kind of a sort of a local favorite to coach there at an important position like defensive line. Obviously, Shane Beamer trying to build something that can last there in Columbia, especially with other coaches who kind of come into the SEC near the same time. The Billy Napiers, the Josh Heupels, even if you want to count like Hugh Freeze there at Auburn. Well, right now, I would say that Shane Beamer is doing about as well as any of those guys are in terms of what he's building there in Columbia. And the current recruiting class is certainly an indication of that. And bringing a guy like Robertson to work with your defensive line, that's a chance for even more recruiting wins there in the future. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And as promised here on a Friday, special appearance now by the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, time for our Kroger Fresh Take with the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Glad to have him back on the program here today. And, Jake, I know you're a part of the Washington Commanders organization. You may not want to say anything nice about a division rival here, but, boy, a lot of Georgia fans sure have enjoyed the way in which the Philadelphia Eagles have embraced these Georgia Bulldog players after the NFL draft. What did you make of that? Howie Roseman, Eagles GM, speaking so kindly about Georgia and, once again, putting a bunch of former Dogs there in the city of brotherly love.
Yeah, man, it's pretty cool to see. It's really neat, man, just to see some Georgia Dogs, man, get drafted, get to have that experience. For guys like Jalen and Nolan and all the other guys who got drafted, man, that's a huge accomplishment. It's a dream. I'm really glad that they were able to accomplish that for themselves and for the family. But as far as going to Philly, to a division rival, it's kind of a love and hate thing. But wish them all the best, except twice a year, and hopefully I'll have a decent enough scouting report. But man, it looks like they found a formula that they like. They like the guys who've been coached by Coach Smart, and they found something they really like.
So I don't mind telling you this. I'm a way bigger college fan than I am NFL fan. I watch NFL football, but I love college football, and I just kind of always have. Like, the one thing that's always kind of amazed me about the draft process is why more GMs don't kind of do what it appears that Howie Roseman has done here, which is, hey, I'm going to try to find a bunch of guys who are really good for the best team. Georgia's obviously a dominant program. Players have succeeded there at a high level in your era, now the era that's going on here right now. It just sort of stands to reason to me, if I was a personnel guy, I'd be going for players like this who've achieved against great competition. Obviously, the SEC provides that. Performing every day in a tough environment during practice. It seems like that's what, in this case, the Eagles have gravitated towards. I'm surprised more GMs don't think that way, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's a great idea because you know what you're getting. You're getting a guy who understands winning culture, who's been coached by some really good coaches, guys that have come from a winning program. So that means that, man, they're coming in with high expectations. They know how to win, and they're going to do everything it takes to win. So for me, it makes a lot of sense to me.
On a different draft note, we saw a guy like Darnell Washington kind of slide in the draft a little bit. It seemed like there may have been a couple of injury, kind of red flag type things that popped up. And I think for a lot of Georgia fans, Jake, this is frustrating. And as somebody who's been through the draft process, I'm curious how you view this because, a year ago we heard that about Nakobe Dean, and yet once again the Eagles were thrilled to be able to draft him. We heard that about Jamari Salyer. Jamari turned out to be one of the better rookies in the league last year, and Brandon Staley has said, got to help the Chargers save their season. Some of this red flag injury stuff ends up being kind of a bunch of nonsense in some respects, and yet once again, some Georgia players had to kind of fight against that some during this year's draft process. As a guy who's been through this and kind of been picked apart when it comes to being selected in the NFL draft, what's it like being a player in all of this? Because, boy, it seems like there's a lot of excessive negativity sometimes during this pre-draft process to a degree that I think is unfair, not just for Darnell, but for players across the board sometimes, it seems.
Yeah, you kind of hit on it just a little bit, man. In that process, especially the combine process, I mean, they're not looking for what's right with you, what you do well. They're just looking for what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
Especially when it kind of comes to the medical history and stuff. I mean, they are just looking for any reason kind of not to draft you or to move you down the board. So I really hate it for Darnell, but I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of how he responds from it, man, because I think he's a great football player, and there is no telling what his ceiling can be. Man, if he really just grinds after it and goes after it hard, I mean, he could be a super dominant football player at this level, because he can do freaky things that there's not many other human beings on this planet can do. So, man, really, it's going to be really fun to see. I hate that for him, but I know he's going to kind of take it with a chip on his shoulder and be ready to respond.
You're a quarterback. You're obviously thinking about your own career, but I'm sure you also saw Stetson Bennett drafted 4th round by the LA Rams, and it sort of seems to me, Jake, and maybe you'll agree with this, that, hey, to go to a quarterback, you have, I guess, a little bit of a relationship with him, Matthew Stafford. You at least, kind of, know of him a little bit at least. A quarterback-friendly coach like Sean McVay, it seems like that's a better situation maybe for Stetson than otherwise could be. I mean, you sometimes think about, quarterbacks that don't always get along with their backup quarterbacks very well. I have a hard time imagining that'll be the case for him and Stafford out there. And obviously, as I said before, I'm sure McVay's the kind of a coach a lot of quarterbacks like to work with. How advantageous of a spot do you think Stetson is for being able to land there in L.A.?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid kind of spot for him to go. They got a great thing rolling there, and get to go with a fellow dog like Matt Stafford there. I mean, that's not a bad learning experience to be in the same room, man, with a future Hall of Famer. So that's awesome. They'll get to have that in common. Yeah, man, it's gonna be fun to see what we're gonna see out of Stetson, and wish him all the best.
You've started games in the biggest city in America, the New York Giants. Stetson kind of out there in L.A. Did you give much thought to that before your pro career of, hey, obviously if it's an NFL town, most of them are all going to be pretty big cities, but, much along the thought of, playing in a place like New York or playing in a place like L.A., a little bit different than maybe down here in the SEC where we're talking about mostly small college towns. Did it feel different in a situation like that? And do you imagine it might feel different for Stetson actually being in a very big city like Los Angeles?
Hey, like I'm not a huge city person, man. I'm just a dude from Middle South Georgia, who loves to be out in the country and loves to play some football. But man, it was pretty cool to kind of think about. Man, I am playing for, was playing for the New York Giants there at one time. So that is pretty cool. Definitely, up in the Northeast area, and pro football is a big deal. Sure. And all over the country too. So. But definitely in the South, we love our college football.
No doubt.
But it is pretty cool to think about. Man, I am playing for a big time program and a franchise, and man, just want to do your best and represent the right way.
I want to ask you about the situation here at Georgia in a moment. Before that, though, let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, Kroger got you covered as you get ready for Mother's Day next Sunday. Now, y'all don't forget about this now. It's time to go ahead and get those greeting cards bought, the gift cards, flowers, all the stuff you need to make Mother's Day special for that special mom in your life, whether it be your mother, your wife, or anybody else. Go ahead and do some great stuff there. Kroger.com/Mother's Day, a great website to go to, or just stop by and shop in store and get ready for everything you need for this upcoming Mother's Day. That's next Sunday, so make sure you're ready for all of that. Jake, this week on our show, we've talked about Carson Beck a little bit. One of the things that I've said is that, I'm really impressed with the growth that I've seen from Carson. And Carson had an interview recently where he kind of talked about some of the challenges that he faced, both in terms of coming in at Georgia during a COVID year in which I think the sport was probably weirder than it's ever been. He's been pretty candid about how weird that was with the lack of connection, all the Zoom meetings, things like that. Of course, you experienced that yourself in the NFL too. But he's also talked about, having a chance to maybe emerge as a starting quarterback once JT got hurt in 2021, and Carson, by his own admission, not quite being ready for that. But we would all say with our own eyes, it looks like he is more than ready here right now. And I don't know that this spring Carson's gotten enough credit for the way that he's grown and matured as a person. Obviously, he's got the skill set to play the quarterback position. But how about like the intangible part of all of that? What have you seen from that when it comes to Carson Beck? Because it seems like that may be what's rounding into form for him as much as anything is right now.
Look, I completely agree. I see a guy right now who's been around the block, who has some experience. He's not approaching this as a college quarterback. Man, he's really taking a professional approach to playing the position, to representing the university, the program, everything that comes with it. He's just being very professional about it, man. I loved his performance during G-Day and then everything else from that. So I'm super excited to see what Carson is going to show us this fall, and how he's going to take ownership of it. This is his show now. I believe it's going to be his show. And man, it's gonna be fun to watch and fun to see.
I'll squeeze in one tiny thing before we let you go. You start looking ahead for him too. It's September where you're playing, some of these games this year for Georgia, not quite as high profile as they've had in the past. And then all of a sudden you go on the road to Auburn right there at the end of the month. I remember your first, big start going on the road, Notre Dame. Obviously, you kind of face a big-time stage like that. How do you get a guy ready for a road environment that's never been in that spot before? I know you can pump in the crowd music, the crowd noise, things like that, but what's it like going on the road when you've never experienced that before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you're just going to have to find a way to block everything out. It's going to be a hostile environment. It's going to be loud. Man, just trust in your preparation, trust in the process, and really trust your teammates, man, because it's just you guys. That's what's kind of really, really fun to me about going on the road in the SEC. When you walk into Neyland or you walk into Jordan-Hare, I mean, it's just all the opposing team's color, and everybody's against you, and all you got is your dudes on the sideline and your coaching staff. That's it. So, man, I love being able to go into those environments and fight our way out. Come up with a win. So I love that. I know he's going to look forward to playing that as well.
I love that description, Jake. That's good stuff. Jake, we always appreciate your time here on the show. We wish you best of luck as well as you continue to work on your own game here this off season. So best of luck with that. We'll look forward to talking to you here on DawgNation Daily and our Kroger Fresh Take again very soon as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate you.
All right, great stuff from Jake Fromm. Let's get ready to wrap up today's show, and we'll do so with some of our golden shoes here. And we'll go ahead and please. Let's go ahead and fire off the music and get ready to wrap things up here on a Friday. I'll show you this from Georgia football. So yesterday we had our May the 4th golden shoe. Georgia put out its own May the 4th Star Wars tweet. And far be it me for being critical, this is obviously a beautiful edit here. You got some cool Star Wars stuff. You got the Georgia guys there, lightsabers in the background. Clearly a well-done edit. I sort of feel like, though, if you're going to do the Star Wars tweet, I need to see a Georgia face like superimposed onto a Star Wars costume. I sort of feel like I need more of that. Kirby Smart as... maybe Darth Vader, or, I see Cedric Von Braun right there in the middle. Maybe make him like a Luke Skywalker figure, something like that. I sort of feel like we need a little bit more of that. Good stuff. It's good, but I could use a little bit more costumage on the Georgia faces there for that. So good try by Georgia football. But I could take a little bit more Star Wars in the Star Wars tweet there on that. As far as our next golden shoe goes, we'll give out another one of these. South Georgia Dog 13 sent this to me the other day related to the NFL draft. You see Jalen Carter there. He says the Falcons must be allergic to dogs, meaning they still have not drafted one in the first round. I had a chance to draft Jalen Carter and didn't. He says that's okay. Our dogs are also allergic to losing. So obviously he's excited about the fact that a lot of Georgia players go into Philadelphia, or maybe they have a better chance of winning than the Falcons have had over the years. Another golden shoe here. Obviously there's been a lot of talk lately about the situation in Alabama, and I guess also a brand new show apparently coming to HBO Max, or I guess now it just wants to be known as Max, called Bama Rush. Heather Capallo sent this to me. I'm guessing we're going to be seeing this meme a lot moving forward of what appears to be an Alabama sorority girl, but perhaps unhappy with not getting into the sorority she wanted to be in. You see some crocodile tears streaming down there. The Bama Rush thing. This meme may have some staying power, and Heather Capello may be the first one to kind of share that with us, so we'll give her a golden shoe there as well. Then finally, there's this. I know this has been a long time coming for a lot of folks. Houston Evans sent this to me. A golden shoe-worthy submission, he says. Vanity UGA license plate from the great state of Florida, or at least it's a great state for places where a lot of dogs are congregated. He says the Jacksonville Bulldog Club was instrumental in making it happen after many years of appealing to the state legislator. These are the first. So Houston Evans shares his with us. He gets Dog 8. He says a lot of the other combinations of DAWG were already taken. But nonetheless, a great-looking Georgia license plate in the state of Florida. How awesome is that to be able to see? Really good stuff. Congratulations to everybody a part of the Jacksonville Bulldog Club who made that happen. And obviously, golden shoes all around, including Houston, who shared that with us. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, they may be seeing a lot of those Georgia license plates coming up 176 days from right now. Georgia in Jacksonville to beat the Florida Gators. We will look forward to that when it goes down, and look forward to seeing all of you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, we'll get ready to get your comments and get ready to bounce out of here on a Friday, and hope all of you have big weekend plans coming up. Enjoying yourself. Here's in the kind of early stages of summer here, final stages of the school year, so hopefully you're getting ready to enjoy all of that. Mark 42 says, y'all get all the politicking out of the way before BA joins or he'll move on. Have y'all been doing politics over here? Come on, y'all. Don't be doing that. Don't be doing that. Let's see what else. Let's see what's going on here. Do y'all have stuff I can read? All right. Let me give y'all a chance to get on topic, and I'll come back in a minute. Miriam Corbin says, glad they finally got their Georgia tags there in Florida ready to rub it in. Yeah, I thought those looked really good. It just really looks good to see that. So that's awesome to see. I know it was a long time coming. The folks in Florida fought against it, but ultimately the Georgians prevailed, as they have a tendency to do. So Philip Jordan Wells has been on a kick as of late, where he's putting them on at the end of everything. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but I do like going to Jamaica, though, so maybe it's got something to do with that. Ken Holcomb says the Alabama baseball coach Bohannon must have a gambling addiction to have taken that big of a chance. He can't be that dumb. He has a finance degree from Berry College and a master's in business administration from Wake Forest, both prestigious academic schools. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously we're speculating about, something that we maybe don't have all the facts about, but to me, it sort of suggests less like a compulsive type thing and more of just a careless type thing. In other words, if you were compulsive, maybe you'd be trying to find a way to get hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars down on a bet like this because you knew you had a winner. In this particular case, it just sort of seems like he casually contributed to something that only had the potential of netting him a few $1,000s. You just can't bet a lot of money on college baseball games. It's just hard to do. And if you tried to, people would just see it coming a mile away. And I just don't think, and that's one of the issues you kind of run into with, a lot of people who are involved in sports, they don't swim in gambling waters. They don't understand kind of how that world works. There's just not very much money bet on some of these games, and so if you bet big, people are going to notice it, for sure. Steve Shaffini, by the way, always great to see him, says there should have been a Photoshop of Chewbacca on that UGA tweet. Yeah, far be it for me to criticize UGA, especially their very talented social media folks, but I sort of feel like we could have had a little more Star Wars in the Star Wars tweet. I sort of feel like we could have had, like I said before, our buddy Mad Dog, he had, Kirby Smart superimposed into like a Jedi-looking thing. I sort of want to see UGA figures wearing Star Wars costumes. I sort of want to see that. Maybe you bring back, what was his name? Was it Chris Conley, the former wide receiver? Maybe bring him back if you want to do your Star Wars stuff in the future. Alan Verbanchik says, do I ever get a chance to steer the cruise ship? No, they don't let me do stuff like that. They don't. But maybe one of these days they will. Maybe that's the case. One of these days, they'll let you take a tour of like the behind-the-scenes part of the cruise. I'd like to do that at some point. I think that'd be fun. Keith Vols celebrating the fact that Georgia's now reigning 481 days as college football's national champion. Boy, that's fun to see. Julian Harris says, speaking of Florida, remember that time they tossed the shoe and the entire program imploded? Yeah, boy, they haven't been the same since then. And what's funny is I've played a couple of clips this week from that Carson Beck interview. Well, one of the people that interviewed him was Marco Wilson's dad. And in the interview, it had nothing to do with Beck, but Mr. Wilson was talking about, just scrutiny that football players get. And he said something very, very funny, something along the lines of, and listen, I know my son threw a shoe in a game. And so it's like, very, I guess, cool about just kind of acknowledging what an odd scene that was. Mr. Wilson, I thought it was really funny in that particular video. Let's see what else is going on. Eric Dvorsky says, I think this is the year we get the championship recruiting bubble. Right now, it certainly seems like a strong possibility. It does indeed. It does indeed. Let me go to a YouTube, see if they're back. They're back on.
Hey, Brandon.
Yes, sir.
There's some conspiracy rumors out there today that this show is taped, the whole show.
No.
So is there anything you can say or do to let the people know that you're live on Friday?
Yeah, let's see, because we did have a couple of pre-recorded portions. You saw the red shirt there. So let's see if I can hold something up here. Let's see if I can get the date. So if you look at my phone here closely, you can see the little red dot there. That shows you that it's May 5th. So we are live here. We are doing this on the day for sure. All right, let's see what else is going on over here on the YouTube side of things. Crow King 123 says you have a freshman you like to start here in 2023. Freshman to start. I don't think a starter necessarily. There are a couple of second-year guys I really like. I think some of those freshman linebackers, certainly C.J. Allen, I think they're going to be on the field a good bit for Georgia. They're going to contribute to depth there at linebacker. But as far as a freshman to start, I think Janelle Aguero is going to be on the field. I think C.J. Allen's going to be on the field. I think Jordan Hall is going to be on the field. There are a good number of freshmen who I believe will be on the field for Georgia at different times. But if you want to call them starters, I don't know that you get that. I don't know. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says, do you think we might see a 2-quarterback system early in the season based on schedule to get a real look at these quarterbacks toss-up? Yeah, for right now, I don't think it's a toss-up. I think that's what it comes down to. And listen, there's a lot I like about Brock Vandagriff, and I think that Vandagriff has a chance to be himself a very good quarterback. But I think it's obvious who the Georgia starting quarterback is going to be, barring some sort of injury. And so, at one point in time, I'd suggest, well, maybe you take the whole thing into the fall and let all these guys have their chance to play as a way of kind of keeping them in the program, but also kind of making sure you've got the very best quarterback. I think based on kind of what I've heard and based on what I've seen with my own eyes, I think the performance by Beck during the spring was decisive enough that you don't need to do that anymore. And that Brock Vandagriff, if he is the Georgia backup, will have every chance to play the way that a backup gets to play. In a place like Georgia, that could be pretty frequently because Georgia expects to win a lot of its games convincingly. So I think that Vandagriff will get his time there on that. But I don't believe the Georgia quarterback competition is close enough right now that you need to do that more than you just would for a sort of a typical backup situation. That's what I think that Vandagriff probably is right now. But guess what? If that is what he is, that's what Beck was a year ago. It wasn't particularly close between Bennett and Beck a year ago either. And now Carson Beck is ready for his moment in the sun. Vandagriff could be very well ready by this time a year from now. But for now, I believe that he is just the backup quarterback at Georgia. Memphis Dog says, can I please comment on On3's receiver rankings? I did see these the other day. What was I supposed to comment on? I guess Wingo was lower than I thought he would be, if I'm remembering it correctly. I think Jeremiah Smith was at the top, I guess. There are a lot of people who think that Jeremiah Smith could just be the best player in college football, or I should say in high school football, period. I mean, Jeremiah Smith has a lot of big supporters right now, and there seems to be a little bit of a growing relationship between Smith and Georgia. We'll see how real that is coming up. But Memphis, what else was I supposed to notice about that? DMAR42 says the real me, not the AI version of me, is about to go play video games. I don't know about that. It's Croaking saying that. DMart says about 6 pina coladas deep on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Listen, that's what I wish I was. You have to be on the DawgNation cruise to see me 6 pina coladas deep, or whatever my drink of choice might be. Frank Patterson says, can you please comment on LSU's library? I did see that tweet. I guess it sort of went viral of like the guy saying this is what LSU's locker room looks like, pristine and nice. This is what the library looks like, empty shelves and had some sort of disheveled stuff. Are libraries even still a thing? I mean, isn't everything on the internet now? Like, I guess that's what I saw that tweet that kind of went viral. That's what I sort of wondered. Like, how big of a thing are libraries now? I mean, are college kids going to libraries and checking out books? Is that still something that people do on a regular basis? As you might guess, I did not spend a ton of time in the library when I was in college, but there was a thing. You know, when I started college, the internet was actually fairly young, fairly new. So we were using internet for a good bit of stuff. But I'd say your reference materials were more book than not when I was in college. But I'm guessing now it's probably flip-flopped, where you may still be using a book here every now and then, but most of what you really want's on the internet, isn't it? Like, how big of a deal are libraries anymore? I'm not quite so sure about that. Also, y'all mentioned AI. I have an AI prediction. I want y'all to bookmark this. Come back to me 10 years from now on this. Here's my prediction. I do not believe that AI text is ever going to be much of a thing. In other words, you do like the chat GP or whatever you call it thing where like the AI writes something. To me, I think that obviously looks fake, and I think it looks fake in a way that's worse than real writing. Even if the actual quality of the writing is better, the actual text of the writing just sort of seems worse. It sort of seems obviously fake, almost like bad CGI. But here's what I believe. This is the part I want you to bookmark. I predict that 10 years from now, almost every photograph will be an AI photograph. That people actually like fake photos better than real photos. And that people will post fake photos of them. And they almost do this now when it comes to Instagram filters and things like that. But 10 years from now, fake photos, because you see the one of what's her name, the famous person that was not even at the Met Gala, or Gala, however you say it, but there was a photo of her as she was. Like some of this, AI photography is getting pretty advanced. I predict that 10 years from now, we will only have fake photos, and people will prefer them to real photos, even of themselves. And that'll be a thing, although I don't believe that AI text ever really will. So that's my deal. Donnie Wilkerson says he doesn't believe the quarterback race is over. I sort of think it is, but we'll see. Kenneth Holt says, I wonder how AI will affect sports analytics and sports betting. Yeah, I mean, this kind of stuff always kind of takes on a life of its own at some point in time. We'll have to, see about that there as well. Julian Harris predicts that Georgia Tech is going to hire the first AI offensive coordinator and still get dominated by Georgia, which is actually very funny. DMart42 on the subject of the Brock Vandegrift interview. I knew it was out there. We'll get into this next week with Aaron Murray on that topic for sure. I think we'll probably get into that some. Let's see what else. Let me go over to DawgNation.com for a minute, see what folks are doing over there. Brer Double Dog, speaking of library, says, my freshman goes to science library to study, and believe me, she's no scientist. So I guess I get that of going to a place to study, sort of a quiet venue. A library sort of works well for that. But like, how many people are like going to a library and checking out books? That's the thing I guess I don't know. Now, listen, sometimes, the fact that, I guess I've used a local library, certainly for my kids in the last couple of years. And sometimes I'm always like, books that looks pretty interesting. I guess I don't really use it very much because my issue is, like I have over the course of my life, I will check out a book, then lose the book, and it just been cheaper to buy it because I end up losing it. So that's my issue when it comes to using a library. So I know that local libraries are still a thing, but are like college kids for research still checking out books out of a library? I guess I just don't know that. DT says my LinkedIn photo is 15 years old. I'm an AI beta user. That's kind of funny. I was actually thinking the same thing too, because a bunch of Alabama fans were making fun of me yesterday, and they were using my Twitter avatar to do so. And it made me realize I've had that picture since like 2014 or 2015. Like, I look so much younger in that picture than I am now. Like, I've got to change my Twitter thing. It's not even like a vanity type deal for me not changing. It's just a lazy thing. My wife gives me a hard time too. Like, I'm not active on Facebook. I just don't really do much on Facebook, but other than obviously communicate with you on the show. But apparently, like, my Facebook header is me with my son when he was a baby before my daughter was even born. Like, my daughter was actually giving me a hard time about this yesterday, about not even having her on my Facebook page. But But there you go. Go Dogs, by the way, says the real me never wears black on Friday. So the suspicion continues about whether or not I'm actually here or not. Let's see what else. DT pointing out the Falcons have not drafted a dog in the first or second round ever. That's exactly right. Let me bounce back around the comment section. We'll probably get ready to wrap up after that. Kind of let y'all get your weekend started here. Cousin A says the next Amazon's going to be in the field of AI. I want a millionaire. Just pick the right AI company. Yeah, I think that's what we're kind of doing right now, sort of fumbling around, sort of figuring out what the best way to use some of this kind of stuff is. Because I really do believe, like, some of the stuff that I read that was written by AI, it's kind of amazing that a computer can do this, but it still sort of seems somewhat fake to me. That there'll always be a market for something that's real and genuine, as opposed to kind of something that's fake. I think to me, there's a certain, something's just kind of off with it. It just sort of feels off. And like the AI photos that I see, even of like famous people sometimes, and like a lot of times you see these sort of like greatly exaggerated AI photos, I think those almost look better than real. It's the person, the way they kind of want to be thought of, or the way that people want to think of them. And so that's why I think those could have legs. But, you know, so the other day I played, and I've never really done this before. My brother-in-law had one of those, like you put on the glasses, and he had like a golf video game, and it was like at TPC Scottsdale. And so I got to play like in the stadium course there at TPC Scottsdale, and it was kind of cool. Now I wonder, I sort of felt like, well, if I did this for 2 hours, would I get bored with it and finally realize how not real it is? Maybe I would, but in a short period of time, I'm not saying I thought I was in Arizona, but it was real enough. It was a neat experience, and it was all around me. And you know, I was kind of doing it within kind of a confined space, but if you have a more open space than that, I think it can actually feel, you know, really pretty real. UGA Boy for Life, Bernetti, appreciate you being here. Thanks for checking in. DMart42 says, I'd love to play an undefeated Michigan, or as he calls them, a diet version of UGA, which is very funny, in the playoff. Yeah, I think that may be one of those games we have circled if it does take place. We talked about this the other day. You know, any talk of Michigan being better than Georgia, I think, requires a pretty big leap of faith, and if anything, maybe even a suspension of belief, just given the fact that Georgia absolutely dragged Michigan 2 years ago. Jonathan Aarons asked a good question. He says, listen, last year Georgia played a close game against Missouri. If that were to happen again this year, who do you think it'll be against? If it's like Missouri, here's the thing. It's going to be a game that you don't expect it to be. And I believe that's about as likely as anything. In other words, if you said, okay, well, I'm going to let you pick 2 or 3 games that you think could be a close, challenging game, by the way, including the SEC championship, and I'm going to then have a sort of a collection of games that you would not assume the close game would come from. I think the odds are probably just as good, if not better, that some random team plays Georgia close than some team that you might have circled. Because if we have that game circled, then Georgia's sort of shown you they have the game circled too, and they are, generally speaking, pretty focused for something like that. So I honestly believe that if Georgia wins a 3rd straight national championship at some point in time over the course of a 15-game schedule, Georgia will probably be in a fight for its life at some point in time. And maybe that comes against a team like Ohio State that you would expect to be able to challenge Georgia, or maybe that comes against a team like Missouri that you kind of don't expect. I would say, because of just the nature of how Georgia's been, having a team that you don't expect sneaking up on you is maybe just as likely, if not more likely, than one of the teams that you would suggest, just because in that category of you know, potential threats to Georgia, those teams seem to have Georgia's attention, and the gap between Georgia and the next group in college football right now seems so wide that it's just really hard for them to do it. I don't think it'll be Tennessee. I don't believe. But, you know, could it be Kentucky? I don't know. I mean, you know, I guess it could almost be anybody, because if it could be Missouri a year ago, then it could certainly be anybody for this upcoming season. I realize I'm not answering your question, but that's kind of the point that I'm sort of getting to is that team most likely to challenge Georgia, I'll take mystery candidate almost over any sort of named opponent there. Kirby's belt on the subject of the transfer portal in basketball. I don't know that I saw that story. I did see where the Kentucky guy is going to Kansas now. And like I haven't followed that story closely enough to know what's going on with that. But obviously it seems like all of that's related to NIL. And there is an element of that some fans don't like. I certainly get that. Mike Gilbert says, what about Tennessee Martin? Hopefully not Tennessee Martin. Hopefully not Martin, not UAB. Although I do think that Trent Dilfer could be a good coach for UAB, but hopefully not at the expense of Georgia. Frank Patterson, also on the subject of Georgia basketball recruiting. Yeah, you bring in the a guard from IMG Academy. Sounds like that's a pretty good prospect. That's like a top 50 recruit or something like that. Georgia basketball recruiting, transfer portal and high school is, I think, going pretty well right now. They brought in a big 7-foot type guy. It seems like Mike White is starting to build a little bit of a roster there. I know that last year got off to a good start, then the season kind of fizzled after that. But it seems like there's going to be a better quality of player in Athens this year. We don't have a ton of time to talk about that on this show. I wish we had more time because it seems like Mike White's probably doing some pretty good stuff. DMart42 also brings up an interesting point of, okay, on the road at Auburn, and by now y'all I think can probably tell that's on my mind a little bit because we find a way to talk about that a pretty good bit going on the road after not really being tested very much prior to that. But as DMart points out, if Auburn were a little bit better, then that game might actually be dangerous. But given what we think that Auburn is right now, they may just not be good enough to make that game a threat. But if they were a little bit better, like right now, this may be worse than the typical Auburn team. If you think about 20 years worth of Auburn football, the average of how good Auburn is, this right now on paper may be a worse team than that. If it was sort of the average typical Auburn team, then going on the road there early in the season, that could be kind of interesting. Good to see Christy in the comments section. Always starting it up with the likes of Jay Shipes and whatnot. Always funny to see that. Foster Moss says, you look late in the season against Ole Miss. They might keep it close at first, but we're at home, so I wouldn't worry too much. Yeah, Foster, that's pretty much my same evaluation of that, probably. Well, let us see what else. Back on Facebook here for a moment. By the way, William Camacho also reminding us that today is Cinco de Mayo. So for those of you who have big Cinco de Mayo plans, I got an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old. Like, we have no Cinco de Mayo plans in our house. My son's got a baseball game tonight. Like, that's the extent of our Cinco de Mayo plans. But for those of you who'll be out enjoying yourself, hope you do get a chance to do that. Kent Holcomb looking forward to a big series of the Braves against the Orioles. Yeah, Orioles, kind of a fun team in the American League right now. Philip Jordan Wells calls it Cinco de Ringo, which is kind of funny. That's pretty good. Joseph Kennedy makes his feelings about Auburn very clear in the comment section. Can't disagree with that. DT gives us his ideal college football playoff. Georgia beats Bama in the semis, then Ohio State for the national title. Case closed, shutting all them pie holes. Yeah, at that point in time, there'd be very little anyone could say to Georgia about anything at that point in time. All right. Anything else? Anything else? Quickly before we go. Anything else? Nature Gator says, and Stegman Coliseum is still falling apart. Well, listen, I don't know about that. I think they're trying to get that fixed. Jalen Jackson, in kind of defense of the Falcons, drafting Bijan Robinson. I think it'll be interesting to see. I do. I do. I mean, there's obviously a chance that Bijan Robinson is the best running back prospect in quite some time. And if that's the case, then no Georgia fan anywhere can say anything about not drafting Jalen Carter. I'll agree with that. That if Bijan Robinson is a great sort of generational type talent at running back, then there you go. But generally speaking, interior defensive lineman, especially one of the caliber of Carter, the talent-wise anyway, we don't know what that production looks like in the NFL, but an interior pass rushing defensive lineman is typically of a higher positional value than running back is. So you better be careful if Robinson's only just a typical running back or even a good running back, and Carter is a very high value interior pass rush defensive lineman. At that point in time, Georgia fans will have a platform to say, "Oh, Falcons did it again." So you're right. depending on how this goes, Falcons may actually have a little bit of a response to all this of, see, we did take the better overall player. But Robinson's going to have to be pretty good, I think, to quiet these Georgia fans down on that. Frank Patterson on tanking for Caleb Williams. I'll tell you right now, I believe that Bryce Young's a better prospect than Caleb Williams is. Now, my opinion's on that not worth a dime because, I don't like to do individual player evaluations, but I like things about Bryce Young that I don't believe I've seen in Caleb Williams. So that's my take there on that. All right, we got to go. Good stuff. Thanks for being here today. Y'all check out the AJC online, ajc.com. Obviously, a couple of Braves injury notes to make you aware of. AJC covering this. Ronald Acuna did leave yesterday afternoon's game. I guess that's just precautionary. Had a little bit of a knee issue, I think. Michael Harris also had a little bit of a precautionary issue coming back from injury himself. So keep your eyes on all of that. Also, the aftermath continues from the horrible shooting thing that took place the other day. So you can read more about that. That's online, ajc.com there as well. Plenty of fun things happening around Cinco de Mayo. You can find out more about that online, ajc.com there as well. And, of course, Kyle Wright got a little banged up too. So the Braves had their issues with injuries, and you got more of that online, ajc.com. So make sure you check that out. Also, check out our friends at R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They will do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that today. Air conditioning unit, it's about to be really hot. Summer is essentially here. So go ahead and get that unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Maybe somebody's told you it's old, its shelf life is done, it's time to get a new one. But R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how to get some more cool air out of the old one. So talk to them right now online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then.